Well, this story first began when I was walking down the street in my home in Hackney. I walked past a primary school which unfortunately was at risk of closing, and this was sort of 2 years ago now, and since then I've been documenting school closures across London and trying to look into where the capital's children are going.
Save our schools! Save our schools!
I'm Jacob Phillips, I'm a news reporter at the London Standard. So there's a perfect storm of factors that has hit London and forced families out of the capital. We've seen things like Brexit, the COVID-19 pandemic, the cost of living crisis, and also just a lack of affordable housing, really making it hard for families to live in the city. So that's meant that rents have gone up massively, people are finding it harder to get a mortgage, and therefore they're moving to Zone 6 and beyond out of the capital. And that has unfortunately meant that certain areas of the city are losing children at quite a quick rate, much quicker, and it appears to be accelerating. We're really starting to feel this in reception classes now, as well as in sort of the lower year groups of primary schools. So to put this simply, the problem's also being made worse by the lack of temporary accommodation that's available in the capital. So 1 in 21 children in the capital, according to figures from London councils, are now homeless or living in temporary accommodation. To put it simply again, it's becoming much harder for councils to afford to put people up in the city, and there's crazy situations such as Enfield Council looking at housing London families in Liverpool. Well, some of the most vulnerable families in the capital are having to move much further out, and that's obviously making it impossible for them to go to London schools. We've also seen the birth rate in London really drop off in recent years, and this is contributing to school closures as well. To put it simply, there aren't as many children being born in the city as there were before, to the extent that we've actually had one of London's biggest hospitals has lost its maternity unit. That's the Royal Free Hospital in North London, which is coincidentally where I was born. So we're seeing far fewer children in general. We're not 100% sure what the reason is behind this. I would say that it's also to do with this perfect storm of COVID and life becoming more expensive in general. We know that families in the UK are having fewer children and are having children later. So I think the average age of someone in the UK now is around 34 to have their first child. That's higher than it used to be, and that could be a factor. If you look back a couple of years, the pandemic was happening, which would have been a factor as well. So it could be to do with the fact that people weren't having children during COVID, and therefore children who would have been in reception simply just don't exist. But the figures for London are quite staggering. We know that roughly 27,000, about 500 extra children have disappeared in between 2022 and compared to 10 years earlier in 2012. And in certain boroughs, for example Lambeth, there are now 1,000 fewer children than there were 10 years ago. So it's having a real effect, this drop-off. It's quite a bleak picture when you walk past some of these primary schools. I think you do notice it on school gates, although parents and teachers will insist that schools will remain full of life. But when you look at the figures, there's a lot of schools which have gone from about 400 pupils to 200 pupils. And this problem has even gone a step further once a school is stamped for closure. So I've recently been speaking to a teacher in Hackney who has 5 children left in her class. And there's been other year groups which don't have any kids at all. So year 5 in that particular school is gone completely. In reception and in the nursery, there's just 3 pupils left. And that's because parents are rushing to find other school places for their children. So you had these half-empty schools who were already, you were seeing, empty, maybe the odd empty desk, maybe there was the odd kind of goodbye and parents pulling their children out and moving to other areas of the country. But now this is really accelerating when a school is set to close. So this issue around school closures seems to be moving fastest in 2 particular areas of London. So Lambeth seems to have lost the most schools over the last few years. Actually this week they announced that they're going to close 2 more schools. And then on the other side of the Thames in North London, there's a cluster on the sort of Hackney-Islington border, which is also seeing quite a few schools closing. So 4 schools will close at the end of the academic year in Hackney, and then just over the border in Islington there are 2 more schools that will close. There's also a school just north of there in Tottenham which is due to close as well. So that's 7 schools in about a square mile which will be forced to close at the end of this year. So those 2 areas are the main areas which are being hit by this problem. But outside of that, this isn't a problem that's happening in 1 or 2 London boroughs. We're now seeing the same issues pop up in the sort of wider outer boroughs of London, and this includes Hounslow, and also Newham are now looking to potentially close a school, as well as dropping classes. So a lot of schools used to have 3 form entries, are now moving down to 2 form or 1 form. That's 90 kids in the school year down to around 30. So you're really starting to feel this drop off in the outer edges of the city too. The funding of schools is dependent on pupils. So the number of pupils you have in a school directly contributes to how much funding a school gets. Now, if you had 30 children in a class and suddenly there are 15 kids, you still have to pay for the same number of teachers to teach them. You can't split them in half, and therefore it costs roughly the same, but you have half as much funding. Now, this kind of per pupil premium, I think is what it's called, is really leading to schools to struggle and slip into debt or into a deficit quite quickly, as they have far less money to pay for the usual running of the school, and they're therefore having to make really difficult decisions and cut certain extracurricular aspects, or maybe cut down on staff or in other areas. And then obviously in the worst case scenario, they have to shut the school altogether. Now, the response is a real challenge to this problem. There are councils up and down London who are debating what to do about this issue. And in the worst case scenario, lots of councils are having to cut the schools which often have the most debts, or maybe are the most empty, what some of them are saying is to protect other schools. They need to merge schools together, try and make sure this problem doesn't spread too far. There's lots of different opinions about what to do with this issue. Many parents believe it's quite short-sighted and a bit of a short-term solution to close a school. I mean, well, if children start coming back to that area in the future, what happens to that building? It will be lost forever. If the school is shut, and maybe it's sold on, but it's proven a real challenge to figure out what to do with these schools and what you do about a problem that could continue into the future. So teachers and parents have been quite critical of councils, local authorities, for how they've dealt with the problem so far. In Hackney, we've had one teacher describe it as a completely cutthroat approach, having slashed 4 schools this year compared to 4 the year before. It's one of the quickest rates of schools going in London. And that's been criticised because that's a lot of public buildings which may never be brought back into use again, and also communities. So these are schools that at the beginning of the year would have had several hundred students, but then the teachers feel like it's been completely slashed, and as I said before, they're left with as few as, well, in some cases no children in a year group at all, or 1 or 2, which has led to a huge outcry of upset. Schools are places which are really personal. We all remember our primary school teachers still as adults, and people are heartbroken when these facilities close down, and those memories and upbringings that they had may no longer be had by future Londoners. It's going to be interesting to see where this problem goes next. We have had lots of warnings that this school exodus or this school closures fanning out into the wider areas of London, this could mean that we're just seeing the problem accelerate. But there have been solutions put forward. So Florence Eshalomi, who's the South London MP, who's been leading debate on this, told us that she believes that there are 2 factors that would really help to solve this issue. The first of that being to change the way that education is funded, so to no longer fund schools on a per pupil basis, but to maybe give a school a set amount of money so that they can stay open and they're not as sort of vulnerable to these sort of changes in birth rate in case they do go back up. And then the wider solution that seems to be or wider hope that everyone seems to talk about when we speak to them on this issue is just simply that London needs far more affordable housing. The more houses that are built and the more places that there are for children to live and families to grow up near schools, the chances are that you're going to keep up those pupil numbers, and therefore schools are going to continue to flourish. But that's something that could be years away. I mean, it takes quite a long time to build houses in London. and we're going to have to wait and see in the meantime what can be done to put a pause to this problem. There are several councils in London which have decided that they may have cut 1 or 2 schools, but they're going to pause and not make any more cuts next year. They're going to try and assess the problem and see if they can come up with something more concrete. So we're looking forward to seeing what solutions come forward in the next few years.